Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a story that's, well, incredibly foundational, so familiar you probably think you know every single detail. The Garden of Eden, Adam, Eve, that, infamous forbidden fruit.
Right, the classic setup.
But what if the tale you've always heard is actually far more intricate? What if it's brimming with hidden layers of love, sacrifice, and cosmic drama that completely reshapes everything you thought you understood?
It's a narrative that really underpins so much of Western thought, theology too, yet its deepest nuances, the very motivations behind those iconic choices, they often get glossed over or really simplified.
That's the perfect way to put it. So this deep dive is all about unpacking Eric H. Jansen's article, Lucifer's Temptation and Adam's Choice, The Fall as an Act of Love.
A really provocative title.
It is, and our mission, as always here, is to truly explore this profound reinterpretation. It challenges traditional views, casts new, pretty unexpected light on the motives of Lucifer, Eve, and Adam, and it connects it all to much broader theological frameworks and, yeah, even our own human experiences. We're here to pull out the most insightful, maybe even transformative nuggets for you. Okay, let's get into it. Jansen's work takes the story of the fall, this narrative many of us learned as like a straightforward tale of disobedience, and spins it into something truly astonishing.
Yeah.
He really delves into the motives, the intentions, moving way beyond just breaking a rule to reveal a story that's rich with unexpected depth and honestly startling human and maybe even angelic complexities.
And what's so fascinating here is how this article, it doesn't just offer a novel reading, it builds upon a really rich, intricate theological framework to present the fall not just as some misstep, but as a, quote, layered mystery within God's grand cosmic drama.
A layered mystery, I like that.
It genuinely invites you, to see these foundational figures with entirely new eyes and to really consider the profound implications of their choices on a much, much broader scale. Unpacking a layered mystery. The fall reimagined.
Right. So to really grasp just how profound Jansen's reinterpretation is, we probably need to quickly touch on the traditional view first. The one most of us grew up with, the one that's almost like baked into our collective consciousness.
Sure, the baseline. The standard Sunday school version, so to speak.
Conventionally, Genesis 3 is understood as the origin story of sin and evil entering human history. Plain and simple.
Often seen as a literal event, a literal tree, a literal piece of fruit.
Exactly. Directly leading to humanity's separation from God and, setting the stage for God's whole plan of redemption later on. It usually feels quite black and white, doesn't it?
It does. A simple command, an act of disobedience, and immediate, clear consequences.
That's often the popular understanding, yeah. It's presented as this linear narrative. God gives a clear instruction, humanity messes up, punishment follows, zip, zap.
And that interpretation tends to focus almost exclusively on the act of disobedience itself as the singular, defining element of the fall. It largely overlooks the internal motivations, the why behind the action, or even the broader cosmic context that might be at play.
Right. But Jansen introduces this powerful, almost, revolutionary nuance. His core thesis dramatically shifts our focus. He urges us to look beyond the surface.
How so?
He suggests that Lucifer tempted Eve, not with like a literal apple or fig, but through the sheer force of his radiant appearance and words.
Okay, so the temptation itself is different, more alluring.
Exactly. And here's the really astonishing part, the part that really made me pause. Adam's deliberate choice to sin was out of love for Eve. A profound act motivated by his inability to bear the thought of losing her.
Wow. That's a crucial and deeply moving distinction. It fundamentally transforms the narrative, doesn't it? From a simple act of defiance into something far more emotionally intricate and, frankly, ethically complex.
Totally.
It recasts Lucifer, not as some, slithering, repulsive snake, but as the fallen morning star whose pride and beauty enchanted Eve. That highlights a much more sophisticated and insidious form of temptation.
Enchanted, that's a powerful word.
And Eve, in this framework, isn't presented as this defiant rebel, but as young and naive, maybe overwhelmed by a charisma and allure she just couldn't fully comprehend. It leads to a profound misstep rather than outright rebellion or malicious intent.
So Adam's motivation isn't just following suit because Eve did it, or simply being weak-willed, which is kind of how it often comes across.
Right.
This interpretation suggests it's about a deeply personal, even sacrificial choice. driven by an overwhelming love for his partner and unwillingness to abandon her to face the consequences alone. That's a radical, almost heartbreaking shift in perspective. It really challenges those long-held assumptions.
It truly is. And it's vital, I think, for you listening to understand that Jansen isn't just pulling this groundbreaking interpretation from thin air. This specific article, Lucifer's Temptation and Adam's Choice, is really the culmination of years of his profound theological exploration.
So there's a backstory to this idea.
Definitely. He meticulously builds upon previous cosmic and theological insights developed in his earlier works. These provide the essential framework for this deeper understanding of the fall.
Like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. For instance, he wrote the Book of Enoch, the theological key to the mysteries of the Bible. Now, for those unfamiliar, the Book of Enoch is this ancient Jewish religious text. It's not considered canonical scripture by most mainstream Christian traditions, but it was highly influential in early Jewish and Christian thought.
And what does it talk about?
It delves into these vast cosmic dimensions, exploring the roles of fallen angels, often called the Watchers, and their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, giants and cosmic battles, that sort of thing.
Okay, wow. So we're definitely not just talking about Genesis as an isolated event here. We're looking at it as part of a much broader, ongoing cosmic conflict. That immediately expands the scope, doesn't it?
Precisely. Then there's his work on the gap theory, the war that took place between Genesis 1.1 and Genesis 1.2.
The gap theory. I've heard of that. What's the gist?
In brief, the gap theory proposes that there was a significant, maybe vast, undefined period of time between the very first two verses of Genesis.
Between, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void.
Exactly. During that gap, the theory suggests some kind of cataclysmic event occurred, often interpreted as a pre-Adamic rebellion, perhaps involving Lucifer and other angels.
So Lucifer was already causing trouble before Eden.
That's the idea. This rebellion, according to the theory, plunged the initial creation into chaos before God reformed it in Genesis 1.2. So this hints at Lucifer's earlier pre-Edenic role in cosmic conflict, setting the stage for his actions in the garden.
That adds another layer.
And finally, Jansen's work also includes the fall as a parable, a cosmic calling in God's story of restoration. This particular piece positions the fall not merely as a historical event, though it certainly has historical implications.
But more as a symbol.
Yes, but also as a profound parable, a symbolic narrative of rebellion, sure, but maybe more importantly, a story of God's unwavering commitment to restoration and redemption for all creation.
So putting it all together.
When we connect all these threads, this bigger picture emerges. It becomes clear that Jansen isn't just offering a novel reading of Genesis 3 in isolation. He's placing it within a truly grand, sweeping, cosmic narrative.
Makes sense.
In this view, the events in Eden are deeply intertwined with earlier divine conflicts, these angelic rebellions, and God's overarching plan for restoration. It's not just a single incident. It's a truly multi-layered tapestry he's weaving, and it adds immense depth to our understanding of the very foundations of good and evil, love, free will.
All of it. The architect of enchantment, not just a serpent.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, especially because my mental image of the tempter has always been, slimy snake hissing at Eve. We usually imagine the serpent as cunning, maybe, but definitely repulsive, something obviously bad.
The classic villain image.
Right. But Jansen's article describes Lucifer in a way that's almost dazzling, a figure of such brilliance and charisma that it completely flips our preconceived notions. It suggests Eve wasn't just deceived by a clever lie, she was profoundly captivated by an overwhelming presence.
It absolutely does. And this reevaluation of Lucifer's nature forces us to reconsider Eve's susceptibility. It moves far beyond just simple naivete or weakness.
So who was Lucifer, according to this view?
Jansen asserts that Lucifer was one of God's first and glorious creations, a being of, unparalleled beauty and power. He's explicitly identified as the morning star in Isaiah 14.1 through 15. That's a passage often interpreted by theologians as describing his magnificent original status and then his dramatic fall due to immense pride.
The fallen angel trope originates here, partly.
Exactly, and this figure, Lucifer, is consistently identified with Satan or the serpent in Genesis 3. That connection is made explicit in texts like Revelation 12.9.
So we're not talking about some minor, inherently evil creature from the start. This was a being of immense divine power and, breathtaking beauty, designed for glory.
Precisely. The book of Ezekiel, specifically chapter 28, verses 12 to 17, gives this stunning, almost poetic description. Now, many theologians apply this to Lucifer's original state, even though the passage primarily addresses the king of Tyre.
What does it say?
It depicts him as an anointed guardian cherub, described as perfect in wisdom and perfect in beauty from the day he was created, adorned with precious stones, walking among stones of fire on the holy mountain of God.
Wow.
The text reads, you were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you.
Goodness. Stones of fire and holy mountain of God. That really paints a picture of someone incredibly close to the divine presence, almost part of the divine splendor itself. That's a powerful image.
It is indeed. The reference to stones of fire and his position on the holy mountain of God vividly suggests this unparalleled proximity to God's throne and divine glory. It's comparable in some ways to descriptions found in ancient Jewish mystical texts like 3 Enoch.
Which isn't scripture, but gives insights.
Right, not canonical, but offers these rich symbolic insights into angelic hierarchies. In 3 Enoch, an angelic being named Metatron is depicted as serving in God's closest presence. So this just highlights Lucifer's incredibly high, almost privileged status and his inherent dazzling beauty.
And his downfall, pride, right?
Entirely due to immense pride, as Isaiah 14.14 indicates. His audacious desire to be like the Most High. And this theme, this idea of an angelic being seeking elevation, abandoning their designated heavenly station. It resonates deeply with the narrative of the rebellious watchers back in 1 Enoch, who similarly chose to defy God's order and descend to earth.
So crucially, even after his fall, even after pride brought him down, this wasn't a creature stripped of all its former glory and allure.
Not at all. Jansen emphatically emphasizes that as a fallen cherub, Lucifer retained his beauty and charisma.
He kept his good looks, basically.
And more than that, his charm, his presence. And it was these very qualities, this inherent splendor, that he cunningly leveraged to seduce Eve. Far from being repulsive, Lucifer must have appeared as an enchanting, dazzling figure, radiating this irresistible charm and an almost divine allure. It changes the whole dynamic of the temptation.
That makes so much more sense of why Eve would even engage with him in the first place. It's not just a random snake talking out of nowhere.
Right. And interestingly, the Hebrew word used for serpent in Genesis 3.1, nahash, can actually have multiple meanings.
Oh. Like what?
While it's commonly translated as serpent, it can also mean shining or radiant, which strongly supports this idea of a being that radiated both profound wisdom and an otherworldly, captivating beauty.
Wow. The shining one. That's a very different vibe. It also brings vividly to mind that chilling line from 2 Corinthians 11.14 where Paul warns us that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light.
Exactly. It shows this deception has always been about alluring appearances, about masking darkness with light.
So this raises a crucial question then.
Mm-hmm.
If the tempter was this beautiful, charismatic being, it really shifts our understanding of Eve's susceptibility, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It wasn't a simple naivete, perhaps, or just a lack of willpower that led her astray. Rather, it might have been a fleeting moment of being utterly dazzled by a hint of enchantment, a shadow of infatuation, captivated by a presence that seemed to embody wisdom and splendor.
That makes her choice feel much more human, more relatable than just falling for some crude, obvious lie.
Yeah.
It really highlights the deceptive power of appearances and promises.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 3, Eve's temptation. Not literal fruit, but knowledge and allure. And following right from that, Jansen's interpretation, it significantly redefines the very nature of Eve's temptation. The fruit itself, it moves from being this literal, tangible object to a profound, multifaceted symbol. And Eve's choice becomes less about a simple act of disobedience and much more about a complex aspiration, a longing for something greater, even if it was tragically misguided.
So let's quickly recap Genesis 3.1 to 6, the scene itself. The serpent, described as more crafty than any other beast, subtly questions God's command. He said, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?
Yeah, casting doubt right away.
And then comes the truly enticing promise, the one that must have just resonated so deeply. You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That's not just a lie. It's an incredibly compelling sales pitch, isn't it? For autonomy, for elevation.
It's more than just compelling. It's a carefully crafted, alluring presentation. Jansen clarifies that Lucifer's temptation was not crude deception, but a subtle and alluring presentation that sparked Eve's curiosity and admiration.
Right.
He wasn't merely lying, he was offering this compelling vision, a deceptive path to what looked like a higher state of being. But beneath that alluring surface, Lucifer's true motives, as Jansen explains them, were much darker, rooted in his own tragic fall. He was driven by profound pride and the seething jealousy toward humanity. He saw them, perhaps, as the younger sibling to whom God had inexplicably given dominion over the earth, a once glorious cherub like him, now watching humans rule.
He must have despised them for that divine favor, maybe with a silent burning hatred.
Possibly. So offering the fruit wasn't just a lure to make them like angels. It was this cunning, malevolent scheme to subjugate humanity, to rob them of their God-given freedom, and to disrupt God's perfect creation itself.
Wow, so the fruit isn't just about gaining knowledge in itself, it's profoundly about gaining knowledge apart from God's guidance, achieving a kind of self-derived autonomy, or, yeah, as the serpent promised, a divine status, like God. That's a crucial symbolic interpretation, a desire for self-sufficiency over dependence on God.
Precisely. Jansen explicitly states that the fruit is a symbol of knowledge, specifically, knowledge apart from God's guidance, promising autonomy and divine status. This really resonates with a broader theological theme.
How so?
Well, it finds powerful parallels in the actions of the Watchers, those fallen angels in 1 Enoch, chapters 6-8. They descended to earth and shared forbidden knowledge things not meant for humanity, like weapon-making, sorcery, metallurgy, astrology, with humans in exchange for human women.
Right, I remember you mentioning them.
And this exchange, Jansen posits, wasn't just random. It was a solemn covenant, almost like ancient betrothal practices. The Watchers sought to claim earthly dominion through their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, the giants of old.
How did that work?
By blending their divine nature with human, they aimed to stake a hereditary claim on the earth, since they themselves, as angelic beings, didn't have one. This cosmic power play really underscores the deep significance, the danger of knowledge apart from God.
That truly contextualizes Eve's susceptibility beyond just simple weakness, then. She wasn't just easily swayed, she was part of a young and naive human civilization, as Jansen puts it, and therefore particularly susceptible to a being like Lucifer. Radiating such charisma, offering this pathway to deeper understanding and power, her judgment was just outmatched.
Exactly. And when we look closely at Genesis 3.6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, those phrases, delight to the eyes and desired, are absolutely critical. Jansen emphasizes that these terms point powerfully to an emotional and aesthetic attraction, not only to the symbolic fruit, but to the entire scene Lucifer presented.
Yeah.
Imagine the raw, unadulterated splendor of a radiant cherub with a voice exuding wisdom and authority, a being Eve, in her innocence, her inexperience, had likely never encountered before. This overwhelming presence simply captivated and overwhelmed Eve's inexperienced heart, leading her to desire what was offered.
Which means her choice was not deliberate rebellion, but a misstep born of fascination and a longing for something greater. It sounds less like malicious intent, less like defiance, and much more like a profound, if profoundly misguided aspiration. For growth, maybe, or elevation. It kind of softens the traditional judgment against her, doesn't it?
It absolutely adds a layer of empathy, of understanding to her choice. And this nuanced interpretation, it finds compelling support in apocryphal traditions, too.
Like which ones?
For instance, in ancient Jewish accounts, like the life of Adam and Eve, Satan is frequently depicted as an angelic figure who harbors this intense envy toward Eve's favored position in Eden and humanity's destined dominion.
So his temptation isn't just deception.
No, it's deeply rooted in this intense jealousy. It links back to the rebellious angel's profound envy of the human soul, their appointed dominion. Lucifer's pride, the very cause of his own catastrophic fall from grace, drove him to undermine Eve's trust in God, aiming not just to deceive, but to corrupt God's new, beloved creation out of spite, out of this perverse desire for cosmic disruption. 4. Adam's profound choice, love over obedience.
Okay, this is where the story truly pivots, I think, where Jansen's reinterpretation becomes maybe the most profound. Instead of the traditionally passive Adam, just following Eve's lead.
Right, the sort of also ran.
Yeah. Jansen presents a figure driven by a powerful, even sacrificial love. It completely reshapes our understanding of the fall. It elevates it from just simple disobedience to this complex drama of self-giving.
It absolutely does. And Adam's unique, divinely imbued capacity for love is really central to Jansen's interpretation. God created Adam with this profound capacity, rooted in his calling as the image of God, remember from Genesis 1.2627.
Made to reflect God's nature.
And God's nature is love. Then, when Eve was created as Adam's helper in Genesis 2, specifically to alleviate his deep loneliness, Adam's joyful, almost poetic exclamation upon seeing her, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh."
She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Genesis 2.23.
That reflects an incredibly deep emotional, spiritual, and physical bond. This profound, innate love for Eve forms the absolute core of Adam's heart-wrenching dilemma when everything goes wrong in Genesis 3.
So his actions aren't just a knee-jerk reaction or a passive acceptance or even a lack of thinking it through. Jansen is suggesting something far more deliberate and emotionally charged.
Precisely. Genesis 3.6 describes Adam's direct involvement. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Now, at first glance, it might seem Adam was merely passive, just following Eve's example without much thought.
That's how I always read it.
But Jansen argues for a much deeper, deliberate choice, driven not by deception, but by love. Crucially, remember, Adam was not directly deceived by the serpent's seductive words or alluring appearance, unlike Eve.
Right. Paul says that in 1 Timothy.
Exactly. He explicitly states that Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor.
Okay. That's a key detail.
It's vital. It implies that Adam knew exactly what he was doing when he ate the fruit. He wasn't misled, he wasn't confused, he wasn't unaware of the consequences. He made a fully informed, conscious decision.
So what was his motivation then, if it wasn't deception? What was going through his mind if he knew the gravity of it all? That must have been an unbearable moment.
Indeed, it's presented as a moment of profound, agonizing choice. Adam knew with absolute certainty that Eve had sinned, and knowing God's clear command from Genesis 2.17, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die," he understood she would face dire consequences.
Spiritual death. Banishment.
Exactly. Banishment from Eden, a painful separation from God. And for Adam, this meant the unimaginable prospect of losing Eve. His beloved partner, the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, the one created to complete him, to end his loneliness.
Wow.
His profound love for her and his inability, his utter unwillingness to let her face exile and separation from God alone led to this heart-wrenching choice. He chose to sin deliberately, to defy God's command in order to stay with her, to share her fate.
That reframes everything.
It profoundly redefines Adam's sin as not only an act of disobedience, but also an act of sacrifice, where he willingly sets aside his own perfect standing, his unbroken fellowship with God, his own well-being for the sake of another. It's a truly profound act of self-giving, albeit one fraught with, tragic consequences.
It really is.
And this specific reinterpretation, it raises a profoundly important question for how we understand sin, doesn't it? What does it truly mean when a choice, which is undeniably disobedience against a divine command, is simultaneously framed as an act of profound self-sacrificial love?
Beyond the complex.
It adds immense layers of complexity to a foundational theological concept. It forces us to consider not just the action, but the underlying motive, the intention, the heart behind the transgression. Does this motive mitigate the sin or just make it more tragic?
Good question.
And how does traditional theology typically grapple with such nuanced motivations within the concept of sin? Jansen invites us to wrestle with this paradox, urging us to consider motive alongside action and what that reveals about the depth of human connection and the nature of consequence. V, the echo of Eden, Adam's choice, and Christ's love. Now, if we connect this deeply moving reinterpretation of Adam's choice to the, let's say, the bigger picture, Jansen draws an incredibly powerful and deeply significant parallel between Adam's sacrificial choice and the ultimate, most profound act of self-giving love in Christian theology. Christ's sacrifice on the cross. It's a profound connection that elevates the entire narrative of the fall, infusing it with this redemptive foreshadowing.
That's a huge leap, but yeah, it makes so much sense when you think about it through this lens. Jesus Christ is called the second Adam, right, in 1 Corinthians 15.45. So Jansen is saying Adam's desperate, love-driven motive actually foreshadows Christ's perfect love.
Yes.
That's really remarkable.
Exactly. The parallel is striking. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was, at its very core, a voluntary act of love. He willingly took on humanity's sin, bore the full weight of its consequences, suffered death, all to redeem it, to bring humanity back into fellowship with God.
Right.
The Apostle Paul really articulates this fundamental truth in Romans 5:12-19. He says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man Adam, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous."
So Adam's sin brought death, but Christ's obedience brought righteousness.
Precisely. And while Adam's sin brought death and alienation into the world, his motive, his profound, agonizing love for Eve, mirrors the self-sacrificial love of Christ. It's not a perfect mirror, obviously, but it's a deeply resonant one. Adam, in his imperfections, still showed a love that prioritized another's fate over his own perfection.
So Christ, in a divine sense, saw humanity in its fallen, exiled state, just like Adam saw Eve facing banishment. And Christ, in this ultimate act of love, chose willingly to bear the consequences with us and for us, to not abandon us.
Yeah.
That truly is a powerful echo.
Precisely. Just as Adam refused to leave Eve alone in her inevitable exile from Eden, her separation from God, Jesus did not abandon humanity in its sin, its alienation, its spiritual death. He stepped into that breach, bridging the chasm created by sin.
Wow.
This parallel reinforces Jansen's view of the fall, not just as a story of a tragic mistake or disobedience, but as a parable of love and restoration, a crucial chapter in God's larger narrative of ultimate redemption. It plants seeds of hope even within the story of the fall itself.
And Jansen brings in apocryphal resonance here too, right? Those ancient non-canonical texts that still offer intriguing insights into how people understood these stories early on.
Yes, absolutely. The Life of Adam and Eve, an important apocryphal text from the early Jewish tradition, offers a fascinating echo of this theme.
What does it say about Adam?
In it, after the fall, Adam is depicted seeking penance and continually pleading for Eve's salvation, especially when Satan attempts to tempt her again. This powerfully underscores his deep sense of responsibility and unwavering care for her, even after their shared transgression.
So he didn't just blame her.
Not in this telling. Although the Life of Adam and Eve isn't canonical scripture for most, this text clearly reflects an early tradition where Adam is portrayed as choosing to share Eve's fate out of profound love, not just passive acceptance or blame.
And how does that connect theologically?
This theme resonates deeply with the Christian understanding of Christ's ultimate sacrifice for the church, famously referred to as his bride in Ephesians 5:25, tab 27. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It's a very potent theological image of inseparable devotion and self-giving love that binds two fates together.
Okay, let's loop back to the cosmic context for a moment, because Jansen consistently reminds us that this isn't just an isolated incident in a nice garden somewhere.
Right, it's bigger than that.
He frames the fall as a pivotal test of trust, where Lucifer's temptation wasn't simply a random act of malice, but a deliberate attack and a continuation of his rebellion against God's divine order, as explored back in the gap theory.
That's absolutely right. In this expanded view, the tree of knowledge itself represented not just autonomy or forbidden information, but potentially the temptation to be like angels, this desire for elevation beyond their created station.
Which echoes the rebellious watchers again.
Exactly, those fallen angels who misuse their forbidden knowledge, corrupting creation. And Eden itself, Jansen suggests, might have been more than just an idyllic earthly garden.
Oh. Like what?
Some theological traditions, like the one found in 2 Enoch chapter 8, describe it as a heavenly paradise, perhaps even connected to the third heaven where God dwells.
So the expulsion wasn't just leaving a garden. It was falling from a heavenly state.
Potentially. In this light, the expulsion from Eden then mirrors the profound alienation of the prodigal son from his father's house in Luke 15. It emphasizes the journey of separation and the ultimate longing for homecoming, for return.
And Adam's heart-wrenching choice to follow Eve, even into sin and exile, adds that final, deeply resonant layer of complexity to this whole grand cosmic drama.
Indeed. His willingness to choose Eve's fate over his own perfection, prompted by his overwhelming love for her, becomes this poignant human echo of God's own love.
How so?
It reflects the divine love that pursues humanity despite its rebellion, that doesn't abandon us in our fallen state, but continually seeks reconciliation and restoration. It suggests that even in our most flawed and costly choices born out of love, there can be a shadow, however faint, of that divine self-giving impulse, a timeless lens, the fall in modern relationships.
So what does this all mean for you, for us today? It's fascinating how Jansen takes this ancient narrative and, instead of keeping it locked purely in theology or history,
Right, not just an old story.
he uses it as a symbolic lens, a way to understand profound, often painful modern relationship patterns. It's not just theology, it's about very real, very human experiences we navigate every single day.
It truly offers a profound symbolic parallel. The biblical account of Eve being tempted by the serpent Lucifer, through this promise of greater knowledge and autonomy, remember Genesis 3:1-6.
Yeah, you'll be like God.
That finds a compelling echo in contemporary relationships. We sometimes see a fascination with something that seems greater or more appealing, maybe an ideal, a new path, even another person that can challenge existing commitments.
Okay, that's quite a connection. But it immediately raises questions for me. Can you elaborate on that, particularly when it comes to the nuances of who initiates relationship changes or breakdowns in modern contexts? Because it feels like it could easily become stereotypical.
That's a very important point. Jansen points to sociological research, like a prominent study by Stanford sociologist Michael Rosenfeld back in 2015. His research indicated that in Western societies, particularly within marriages, women disproportionately initiate breakups.
What were the numbers?
His study found that approximately 69% of divorces in the U.S. were initiated by women. Interestingly, breakups in non-marital relationships were more evenly split.
And the reasons?
They're almost always complex, of course, but often include factors like emotional disconnection, persistent unresolved conflicts, a partner's infidelity, or, crucially for this analogy, a deeply felt desire for personal growth, a striving for liberation, self-fulfillment, or a search for a more aligned partnership.
And that striving symbolically aligns with Eve's longing for divine knowledge and autonomy, her desire to be like God.
That's the symbolic parallel Jansen draws. But, and this is absolutely crucial,
Go on.
it's not saying women are inherently Eve-like in some negative or accusatory way, not at all. It's about recognizing universal human dynamics, a yearning for something more, a pursuit of perceived fulfillment that can lead to painful and transformative choices, regardless of gender.
That distinction is incredibly important. It prevents the analogy from becoming overly simplistic or unfairly placing blame, which it easily could.
Exactly. We must emphasize that relationship breakdowns are not solely due to one partner's temptation or desire for autonomy. Factors like domestic violence, mutual infidelity, financial distress, emotional abuse, or simply growing apart are equally, if not more, significant.
Life is complicated.
Very. Jansen is careful to stress that both men and women contribute to the dynamics that lead to these outcomes, often in ways that are painful for everyone involved. This inherent complexity actually makes the fall narrative an even richer mirror for understanding human nature. We grapple with desires, faithfulness, consequences, the delicate balance within partnerships.
It's about recognizing the intricate interplay of aspirations, vulnerabilities, and the profound impact of our choices on both ourselves and our relationships.
Precisely.
Okay, that clarification is vital. So if Eve's temptation has this modern echo in the pursuit of fulfillment, what about the serpent's role? The allure that drives those choices.
Right, the seducer. The serpent's role as a purveyor of alluring but ultimately deceptive promises finds a powerful symbolic echo in modern allurements.
Like what are modern allurements?
Well, they can manifest as charismatic figures who offer new perspectives, maybe compelling ideals of freedom and self-actualization pushed by culture, or even the pervasive influence of social media presenting these curated, idealized versions of life and relationships that make our own seem lacking.
The grass is always greener online.
Exactly. These forces can symbolically disrupt existing relationships. Just as the serpent subtly undermined Eve's trust in God's established order, these modern allurements can subtly erode trust or contentment within a relationship.
How?
Expectations of a better or more fulfilling future, whether that's imagined with a different partner, a different lifestyle, or simply an escape from current challenges, can lead some people, both men and women, to abandon a current partnership.
Chasing an illusion.
Sometimes these choices reflect an illusion of fulfillment, perhaps akin to Eve's hope for divine knowledge that didn't deliver what she expected. In the Christian tradition, this pursuit of knowledge or happiness outside of God's prescribed path or outside of committed relationships is often seen as a misstep, leading to unforeseen consequences, just as the serpent's promise ultimately led to exile. It's about being drawn away by what seems like a promise of something greater, but which may lead to unforeseen pain and isolation.
Okay. And then there's Adam's steadfastness, his profound, self-sacrificial choice to share Eve's fate. How does that resonate in modern relationships, maybe particularly when faced with rejection?
Adam's choice evokes the steadfastness of some partners, who, despite being rejected or abandoned, remain deeply committed and faithful, driven by an overwhelming emotional bond. This devotion, which can be incredibly painful and difficult to witness or experience.
It must be heartbreaking.
It reflects a love that sets itself aside. It's a powerful theme profoundly glorified in Ephesians 5:25-27, which describes Christ's unparalleled sacrifice for the church, his beloved bride. It speaks to profound capacity for self-giving love that seeks to remain connected and committed even in the face of loss, separation, or unilateral decision-making by the other partner.
It's a beautiful parallel, drawing from the highest theological ideals of selfless love. But I know we need to make a critical distinction here, a really important warning about how this idea of steadfastness can be tragically misinterpreted or perverted in extreme real-world situations.
Absolutely. This distinction is paramount, and it cannot be overstated. While the theological insight speaks to selfless, sacrificial love, we must starkly contrast it with harmful, destructive behaviors. Tragically, in extreme cases, rejection doesn't lead to quiet faithfulness, but to destructive behavior such as stalking, harassment, or violence. This behavior, which is statistically significant in cases of femicide, where the perpetrator is often a current or former intimate partner, is not an expression of faithfulness, devotion, or love.
It's
a terrifying manifestation of loss of control, possessiveness, or severe psychological issues, and it must not be romanticized, excused, or conflated with the noble theological concept of self-sacrificial love in any way.
That's incredibly important to state clearly.
The theological insight is about a profound, voluntary choice for shared fate rooted in deep affection. It is not about condoning or romanticizing destructive possessiveness or control over another's autonomy. It's about recognizing where profound human connection can either lead to grace, deep commitment, and shared suffering, or tragically, when twisted by unhealthy attachments and psychological issues, to grave harm and destructive outcomes.
That is a crucial clarification, thank you. It helps us apply this symbolic lens responsibly and with immense care. So ultimately, this whole section invites us to look inward, doesn't it? To reflect on our own choices and motivations in relationships.
Yes. These symbolic parallels serve as a powerful theological mirror for contemporary relationships. They invite you to reflect on the complex interplay of human desires. Men and women who choose a new path driven by a desire for autonomy or a different future can reflect the human tendency to seek self-actualization, sometimes at the cost of current stability or commitment.
And the other side.
Conversely, partners who remain faithful despite profound pain, echoing Adam's choice, illustrate a kind of self-sacrificial love. Through this lens, the fall offers not judgment, perhaps, but a profound invitation to reflect on our own choices, our aspirations, and the pursuit of faithfulness and connection in an incredibly complex world. 7. Theological reflections and enduring insights. So what's truly fascinating here as we wrap up is how these deep insights into the fall, as reinterpreted by Jansen, provide us with both, profound warnings but also enduring hope. It culminates in a powerful message for us today about God's unwavering nature, even amidst human failure.
Okay, let's break down those final theological reflections, starting with Lucifer. His story is really tragic when you view it through this lens of his original glory, isn't it? Not just evil, but fallen glory.
It is, profoundly so. Lucifer's role in the fall is fundamentally tragic precisely because he was this radiant cherub, one of God's most magnificent creations, designed for glorious service and closeness to the divine. Yet he fell through immense pride and this burning jealousy toward humanity.
Pride and envy. Classic.
His temptation of Eve wasn't just a random act, but a deliberate attempt to corrupt God's new creation, driven by his own profound loss of position and the bitterness of his rebellion, as explored in those cosmic conflicts detailed in the gap theory.
And yet, he still had power.
Yes, even in his fallen state, he retained his cunning wisdom and captivating beauty, which he skillfully used to enchant Eve. His story serves as this timeless, stark warning against the destructive, corrupting power of pride, a theme that echoes throughout the Bible, perhaps most succinctly captured in Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall.
And Eve's role, Jansen doesn't paint her as deliberately rebellious or inherently evil, but rather as having made a profound misstep. That seems to offer a more compassionate understanding, maybe.
That's really key to Jansen's reinterpretation. Eve's sin is characterized as not deliberate rebellion, but a misstep born of admiration and naivete. As part of a truly young and naive human civilization, as Jansen describes her in The Fall as a parable, she was simply unprepared, maybe unequipped for the overwhelming charisma and seductive power of a being like Lucifer, a former cherub of such immense light and wisdom.
She was outmatched.
Completely. Her choice reflects this deeply human tendency to be seduced by the allure of knowledge and autonomy, especially when it's pursued apart from God's guidance, seeking wisdom outside its proper source. It highlights our universal vulnerability to promises of greatness that bypass established wisdom and divine order. We see that pattern tragically repeated later with the Watchers and one Enoch, who similarly crave knowledge and power outside their God-given boundaries.
Then there's Adam. He becomes such a complex, deeply sacrificial figure in this interpretation, moving from a symbol of weakness or passivity to one of profound, if flawed, love.
He absolutely does. Adam's unique choice to sin out of love for Eve makes him a profoundly complex and compelling figure in the narrative. While his act was undeniably disobedience against God's clear command, his motive was love. A love so powerful that it placed the spiritual unity of one flesh, that unbreakable bond he shared with Eve from Genesis 2.24, above his own perfect standing in Eden.
It's a warped reflection of divine love, almost.
In a way. This act, flawed as it was, finds a powerful, albeit imperfect, echo in Christ, who ultimately gave his life for humanity out of perfect love. Adam's choice, while bringing tragic consequences, serves as a kind of human precursor to Jesus' perfect love, a love that ultimately opens the way to restoration for all of humanity, transforming a moment of despair into one of foreshadowed hope.
And despite all this drama, the temptation, the missteps, the dire consequence of the story of the fall, as Jansen explains it, ultimately does not end in despair. It culminates in God's unwavering grace and a clear path to redemption.
That is the ultimate, most profound message. The fall, despite its tragic world-altering consequences, does not end in despair. From the very beginning, even in the immediate aftermath of the sin, God mercifully promises a redeemer. Remember Genesis 3.15, the seed of the woman.
The first hint of the gospel, some call it.
Exactly, a prophetic declaration pointing directly to Jesus Christ. As Jansen emphasizes in The Fall as a Parable, Jesus is identified as the true tree of life, the very way back to God's house. It echoes John 14.6, where Jesus famously declares, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me," and Revelation 22.2, which describes the river of the water of life flowing from God's throne with the tree of life on either side.
Providing healing for the nations.
Right. So despite Lucifer's cunning temptation, Eve's human misstep, and Adam's sacrificial yet disobedient choice, God's plan remains steadfastly focused on restoration, with Jesus as the ultimate restorer of humanity's lost dignity, authority, and freedom, bringing us back into relationship with God.
So what does this all mean for us? It's a story that ultimately reminds us of an enduring journey toward homecoming, right? Fueled by grace despite our deepest human complexities and profound errors. It's a story of hope, embedded even in the face of the fall itself. This deep dive into Eric H. Jansen's work truly challenges us to look beyond the surface of a familiar story, doesn't it? It invites us to see profound, often surprising, motives behind ancient choices, and in doing so reveals powerful echoes in our own lives today. It makes you think about the choices we make, particularly those driven by love or aspiration, in a whole new light.
Indeed. This reinterpretation transforms the fall from a simple tale of disobedience into this rich, layered drama of pride, temptation, profound love, tragic consequences, and ultimately, enduring hope. It calls us, I think, to live with greater faithfulness and perhaps more wonder, knowing that God's grace always seeks to bring us home, even through the most complex and difficult human experiences.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, our listener. Considering Adam's deeply personal choice to share Eve's fate out of love, where in your own life do you find the tension between an ideal, maybe obedience, maybe personal growth, and the powerful, sometimes overwhelming call of love and connection to another person?
And what do those moments, those decisions reveal about your own capacity for sacrifice, or perhaps your own vulnerability to a misstep driven by the heart? Something to think about.